So thank you so much, Linda, for joining us today. We're tremendously excited about your presentation. You're joining us from Northern California. And just in brief, your background after studying math and computer science and a decade in tech, Linda had shifted gears and focused on her art. She's been dedicated to her practice and equally to championing various environmental causes through her work in fiber, glass, and land art installation over the past 20 years. Her stitched textural paintings and other works are often precise, bird's eye views of the mutating California landscape. They're intended to echo the processes of destruction and renewal that we're all witnessing. Linda's work has been exhibited throughout the US and in Europe and Russia, and her work is held in several public and private collections, including the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. Thank you so much, Linda.
Well, greetings, everybody, and thank you for that nice introduction, Emily. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today and have my art included in the Baking Waves exhibition. So the title of my talk is Using Beauty to Look at Hard Environmental Issues, and I'm going to be showing you a mixture of artworks included in the exhibition Making Waves, and then other related artworks as well. I'll be focusing on how beauty plays an important role in my work by taking a more in-depth look into the concepts and research that inform my work, as well as a sort of virtual studio visit to show you the craft part of how I make my work. But before I get into my presentation, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from my home in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is located in the Adobe Creek watershed. Like the rest of California, we're in the midst of a prolonged drought, so the creek is dry during a time when it should be filled with water. My home is in what is now called Los Altos, a place name that's only around 70 years old. For thousands of years before that, it was the land of the Puchan and the unceded ancestral homeland of the Muwekma Ohlone. I recognize that I benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and I express my gratitude and respect for Indigenous elders, past, present, and future, who stewarded this land throughout the generations using a practice of reciprocity. Next, I want to share some background information. I'm both an artist and an environmental activist, and I combine the two to make artwork about climate change, water, and land use issues. My approach is to use beauty to encourage people to look at the hard issues that we face. The inspiration for my artwork comes from the connections between humans and the water and land we need to survive. I'm interested in how landscapes and waterscapes change over time and the impact of climate change. My artwork begins with an environmental issue, usually related to water. And once I've selected an issue, I do extensive research to learn more about it by doing site visits, reading scientific and historical publications, seeking out historical and present day maps and photographs, and sometimes collaborating with scientists. My research process is integral to developing the concept for my artwork, and it helps me refine my choice of subject matter and the composition for my work. As general research, I spend a lot of time during the summer seeking out the headwaters of the streams and rivers that we rely on for survival, and they're always located in the most beautiful places I've ever seen. The wilderness is also where I go to find magic and refresh my perspective on life. It's vast and unforgiving, and it reminds me of my place in the universe. You can only reach these headwaters by foot, and it usually takes several days to get there. So I do a lot of backpacking with my life partner, Rob. Climate change is now impacting our backpacking trips, with frequent, intense wildfires becoming one of the additional challenges we face in the backcountry. This photo was taken in July 2018 on the Pacific Crest Trail, east of Redding, California. We saw smoke and an ominous pyrocumulonimbus cloud from our campsite. 2 days later, this was the air we woke up to. Visibility was about 200 feet, and the air was seriously unhealthy to breathe. After that summer, I started carrying an emergency N95 respirator mask in my backpack. And who knew this would become a scarce and essential item both for COVID and the local wildfires we've been having. So I'm not exactly sure how I got interested in water issues, but I think the concept entered my mind subconsciously because of growing up in Los Angeles. My mom's from Luxembourg, a tiny European country where it rains a lot. And she tried to raise my sisters and me with the superstitions of her childhood. So every night we had salad with dinner. And well, you know, because salad doesn't keep very well, we were told that if we didn't finish the salad, it would rain the next day. Well, everyone in Los Angeles knows that it hardly ever rains in LA. So we couldn't take her threat very seriously. But that planted a nagging question in my mind because I was surrounded by swimming pools, palm trees, lush lawns, and golf courses that needed a lot of water, and it never rained. So where did the water come from? Something didn't make sense. And then one day I learned that Los Angeles is really a desert and it imports lots of water from hundreds of miles away to make it look green. And I haven't been able to let go of it since. Now I'm going to share some of my textile work with you, which I call stitched paintings. These are about the wetlands in San Francisco Bay, a body of water that's near and dear to my heart. I'll begin with sharing my research process for these artworks. And just for reference, I want to show you where I live relative to the bay with this pink dot. So the San Francisco Bay is an estuary, which means it's a semi-enclosed body of water where fresh water from the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta, and the local creeks mix with salty water from the ocean. And although you can see that most of the land surrounding the bay is covered with buildings and pavement, all that gray area, the bay is still home to more than 750 species of fish, animals, and birds. I first became interested in the bay in the 1980s when I traveled for work. I was mesmerized by the mysterious view of these colorful shapes I saw from the airplane window as my flight took off or landed at San Francisco Airport. They looked so beautiful and so unreal. What were they? Well, I learned they were industrial salt ponds, and later I learned about their environmental impact on the bay, and they became a natural focus for my artwork. So here's the story behind those salt ponds. In my research, I learned that before California became a state, the bay was surrounded by large areas of wetlands, which are shown in bright green on this map. Back then, we didn't know how important these wetlands were for fish, wildlife, and even us humans. So we filled them in. Today, San Francisco Bay is 1/3 smaller than it was. Over 90% of the original wetlands have been filled for development or turned into salt ponds. You can see how little of the bright green is left, and it's been replaced by purple for development, orange for industrial salt ponds, and light green for agriculture. And we've since learned that the importance of wetlands is that they filter toxic pollution, provide habitat for wildlife, and provide flood protection for humans. But never mind that, it could have been even worse. In 1959, the Army Corps of Engineers proposed filling the bay to nothing but a deep water ship channel by the year 2020. The brown area shows the proposed fill. Luckily, this plan was stopped in 1965 by 3 women from Berkeley who modestly nicknamed themselves the Tea Ladies because their ideas to preserve the bay developed when they met for tea in the afternoons. From left to right, they are Catherine Kerr, Sylvia McLaughlin, and Esther Gulick. They went on to form 2 important organizations to preserve the bay, the nonprofit Save the Bay and the government agency, the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. Okay, so back to how things looked in 1998, because I want to show you that help is on the way. So watch the lower right corner of this map. The red color that's showing up on the map shows 25 square miles of industrial salt ponds in the bay that were set aside in 2002 to be restored to wetlands. It's this combination of the destruction of wetlands and the hope for restoration is what inspired my series of artwork about the bay. So now to show the artwork. So this artwork actually isn't in the Making Waves exhibition, but it's where the series began. So I want to share it first. It's a bird's eye view of those mesmerizing industrial salt ponds near Redwood City in the Bay Area. Levees were built around the wetlands to make table salt, and the concentrated salt water killed the wetlands. This artwork is entitled Puzzle of Salt because although it's great news that some of the wetlands in the Bay Area are being restored, it's a complex task. And it might take more than 50 years because there are technical, environmental, financial, and political problems standing in the way. So the landscape of the salt ponds reminds me of jigsaw puzzle pieces, and in turn, those shapes remind me of the puzzle to be solved in restoring these ponds back to wetlands. And since this is a Craft in America audience, I figure that you're interested in getting closer to the work to see the craft of it. So here's a close-up image where you can see how I painted the silk and then stitched it on the sewing machine using clear nylon monofilament thread. This artwork is in the Making Waves exhibition, and it's closely related to the previous work, Puzzle of Salt, and it's called Wetlands Dream Revisited. It's an imagined landscape of what the same salt ponds could look like when they're fully restored back to wetlands. Although it's my imagined landscape, I didn't totally make it up. I researched historical photographs of that area to understand what the wetlands looked like before salt ponds were built. You can see the salt pond landscape on the right from a 1974 aerial photograph, and then what that same area looked like in 1946, before the salt ponds were built. To understand the colors of a natural wetland, I visited one of the few remaining untouched salt marshes in the bay. So here's the artwork again to show you how I incorporated my research to create the painting. I took the meandering wetlands channels from the 1946 photograph, and then I painted the wetlands in the colors of a natural wetland. And here's an up-close image where you can more clearly see my silk painting and stitching. Here I'm using colored embroidery thread for the stitching. This artwork is also in the Making Waves exhibition, and it's the same composition as the Puzzle of Salt artwork. It's entitled Body of Water, and it relates a body of water, in this case, San Francisco Bay, to our human body, and questions how the ways in which we modify and contaminate the bay affect the health of the water, much in the same way they might affect the health of our own bodies. Water's been painted the color of blood, and the wetlands are colors of human body tissue in various states, from healthy to infected to dying. And here's a close-up of the artwork where you can see the sculptural effects of the stitching. Now I'm going to take you behind the scenes and invite you into my studio virtually to see how I create my stitch paintings. Next Tuesday marks a year since I've been able to work in my studio, and I am really, really looking forward to getting back there soon. So here's my current studio in San Jose at the Alameda Artworks, where I make my textile artwork. It has wonderful high ceilings and skylights, and you can see the bottles of my dyes and other tools stored in the wire shelves behind me. I have a large adjustable height table where I do my painting. I prefer to work standing up. Since I paint on silk, I begin by stretching a piece of white silk in a wooden frame. And then I make an actual size drawing of the artwork, and I trace it onto the stretched silk using a special pencil that stays on the silk long enough for me to make my painting, but eventually washes out. I use liquid transparent silk dyes, and I mix all of my colors from the primaries, cyan, magenta, and yellow. I use black for darker shades, and I dilute the dyes with water for lighter shades. And this is a dye mixing chart I made using the primary colors. This way, when I want to mix a specific color, the chart helps me figure out the proportions of the primary colors I need to use. And silk painting is really similar to watercolor painting. You paint the light colors first and the dark colors last. Because the dyes are transparent, a lighter color simply won't show up on top of a darker one. So I have to really strategically plan how I'm going to apply the colors to my paintings. These are the brushes I use. Most are regular watercolor brushes, but in the lower right corner are some special Japanese brushes I use for blending colors into a smooth gradation. The silk dyes bleed into the fabric, similar to what happens if an ink pen leaks on a shirt. It just keeps spreading and spreading. So I use a resist to create boundaries for the dyes. And the resist is similar in consistency to white glue. And I apply it from a squeeze bottle with a really fine tip. And when it dries, it acts as a barrier to contain the dye. I apply the dyes with watercolor brushes, and I build up multiple layers of dye and resist to create my final painting. So you can see how the resist is acting as a barrier to contain the dyes. It only occurred to me recently that I'm using the resist to build the levees and dams to contain my dyes, just like the levees and dams that my work is bringing attention to. So when I'm done with the painting, I make a sandwich with my silk painting on top, a layer of fluffy material called batting, and another piece of silk. And then I stitch the 3 layers together on my sewing machine using colored embroidery thread to create a highly textured sculptural landscape. I use a capability that exists on all sewing machines called the free motion embroidery or darning feature, where I guide the fabric under the needle instead of letting the machine guide the fabric. This video is being played in real time. It's not slow motion, so it gives you a sense of how long it takes me to make my work. Next, I want to share some works from a series that explores land use policies around San Francisco Bay, inspired in part by a talk I went to many years ago by the poet Gary Snyder. He gave the audience a quiz he calls, "How local are you?" And he asked us questions like, do you know where your water comes from? Do you know where it goes when you're done with it? Do you know where your garbage goes? And so on. At the time, I didn't know the answers to many of his questions, and he inspired me to do some research. As a result, this work gets personal and it gets dirty. So back to the bird's eye view of San Francisco Bay, I researched where my sewage goes, the yellow dot, where my garbage goes, the orange dot, and where my gasoline is refined, the red dot. Do you notice anything these 3 sites have in common? One of the things I noticed is that they're all right on the edge of the bay, and I wondered what the implications of that were. That led me to asking even more questions, and the answers I learned were often disturbing and inspired this series of artworks. I'll start with the site where Bay Area gasoline is refined. I now have an electric car, so I don't use gasoline anymore. I'm so excited. This is a view of the storage tanks at the Chevron refinery located in Richmond, California. I usually like to do site visits for the artworks I create. However, Chevron doesn't offer tours and they don't want you visiting their property. So I had to research it through reading and journalist photographs. And this is a view from Google Earth of the refinery. I outlined it in yellow so you can see where it is. The refinery covers 2,500 acres and it processes 225,000 barrels of crude oil daily. But where does that oil come from? Most of it comes from the Alaskan North Slope, and that's why the refinery was sited right on the edge of the bay for convenient delivery by tanker ship. The water quality of the bay has paid a really high price for this convenience. The refinery is the largest industrial polluter in the region and it's been fined regularly for discharging untreated toxic wastewater into the bay. In fact, just last month, an estimated 600 gallons of a diesel and water mixture were discharged into the bay through a leak in a pipe. It's taken 2 weeks to clean up the spill, and the local environmental impacts are still being analyzed. Here's the artwork I made in response to my research. It's entitled Refined with a question mark at the end, and it's in the Making Waves exhibition. It shows a bird's eye view of the refinery. People ask me why I made the refinery look so beautiful. I purposely use beauty in my work to encourage people to look at the hard issues we face. I want to engage people and educate them, so I prefer this approach over a getting in your face approach. Many people aren't aware of what's involved in refining gasoline and how it could impact the quality of our waters. Discharges of dioxins and PCBs have polluted the waters around the refinery, so eating any oysters or fish caught in this area is a serious health hazard. I hope to raise awareness of these issues through my work and to inspire people to get involved to protect their environment and take steps to get out of their cars and doing things like riding a bike, carpooling, and using public transportation. And here's a close-up image of the artwork. You can see how I changed the color of the thread to match the color of the painting. I'll show you one more artwork from this series that's not in the Making Waves exhibition. I researched where my garbage goes and was happy to learn I could take a tour of that facility. The tour made me feel kind of depressed though, seeing how much garbage we humans produce on a daily basis. But I also have to admit the tour had a fun aspect. The kid in me loves bulldozers and conveyor belts. My garbage goes to a place called Newbie Island. It covers 342 acres and is almost as tall as a 12-story building. The facility processes 4,000 tons of garbage every day. At this rate, it will reach its maximum capacity in less than 10 years. And it smells really bad. This is a view from Google Earth of Newbie Island Sanitary Landfill. I've outlined it in yellow. And can you see how two freshwater channels flow right next to it on their way to the bay? According to the company website, the landfill is an island surrounded by a levee, which keeps its runoff from directly entering the nearby water. So this is the artwork, sanitary, again, with a question mark at the end. And it's an aerial view of Newbie Island, surrounded, highlighting its proximity to our water. We have a history of perceiving wetlands marshes as useless and filling them with toxic garbage. I worry about the water surrounding this landfill. The company claims the landfill has a synthetic liner beneath it, combined with an underdrain system that keeps contaminants from leaching into the groundwater in the bay. But this just seems too good to be true to me. How do they know it hasn't developed a leak? And then what do they do if it does have a leak? So we really need to be finding ways to not put anything in a landfill and to reuse everything we throw away, because really there is no away. Our garbage is being thrown into our bay and ultimately into our water system. In addition to working in the textile medium, I also work in glass, and I'd like to share a few of those works with you. This is one of the artworks in the Making Waves exhibition entitled Ghost of Wetlands Past. It's similar in concept to my San Francisco Bay textiles. It's about the loss of wetlands around San Francisco Bay. I made the artwork by fusing together multiple layers of glass, some with copper foil in between and others with glass frit. But first, I'll present the research behind this. This is a Google Earth view of a popular recreational area just a few miles from my home, known as the Palo Alto Baylands. In addition to the wetlands areas that I've circled in orange, you can see an airport, which I've highlighted in blue, a golf course, highlighted in green, a corporate industrial park, highlighted in magenta, a wastewater treatment plant, highlighted in yellow, and a garbage dump, highlighted in red. All of these were built on top of landfill, on top of wetlands. I wanted to show where the original wetlands were, and my research led me to this United States Coastal Survey map from 1857. This beautiful map of San Francisco Bay has unbelievable detail about all the wetlands channels in the bay at the time. To make my artwork, I focused on the wetlands that were filled for development. So this is the cropped view in Google Earth of what I chose. I then aligned a digitized version of the 1857 map onto the present day satellite image, which reveals the wetlands channels under the landfill and the development. And this is a close-up of the artwork to show you how I represented the built environment as a map-like drawing of roads and buildings. Those are the reddish color lines, which is actually copper foil that's fused between two layers of glass. Wetlands that still survive today are made with colored glass frit, which is a finely ground glass that I carefully arranged on a sheet of glass and then fused. The former wetland channels have been sandblasted into the glass from underneath. And you can see the shadows that are cast on the wall from the sandblasting and the copper designs. So here's the overall artwork again. It's 35 inches high and 35 inches wide, and it's made up of 16 tiles. Each tile is made of 4 layers of glass that are fused together in the kiln, and they're 1/2 inch thick. This is a cast glass water faucet that I made, and this artwork was made using the lost wax technique and building a plaster silica mold that I then melted the glass into the kiln. After the glass cools, I remove the plaster silica, and this is the result. And this artwork is about the vulnerability of our water supply. Next, I'm going to show you another artwork that's not in the Making Waves exhibition, but it's related to the theme of the exhibition and shows the impact of climate change on our seawater. This artwork is about one of the most visible effects of climate change, sea level rise. I made this artwork for a recent solo exhibition at the Museum of Craft and Design, which is located in the Dogpatch neighborhood of San Francisco. The director of the museum asked me if I could make a work that would show how sea level rise could affect the museum. And so this was the resulting artwork. Sea level rise is caused by 2 factors. One obvious one, which is the melting of land ice as the earth warms. And the second one is less obvious, which is as the ocean warms, it actually expands in volume. So already sea level has risen by 7 to 8 inches since 1900. And the rate has increased in recent decades to about 1/8 of an inch a year. We can see the effects of this rise during high tide events in the winter called king tides, as shown in this photograph, where the water in San Francisco Bay is flowing over the seawalls. One of my favorite resources for understanding sea level rise is published on the website of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, referred to as NOAA. Their sea level rise viewer shows the effect of rising sea levels on any place in the United States. When the Trump administration started removing climate change publications from government websites, I became alarmed that I might lose this resource. So I took screenshots just in case it disappeared. Thankfully, it never did. So now I'm going to walk you through the screenshots I took for San Francisco showing 1 foot to 10 feet of sea level rise. You can see that the impact of sea level rise is subtle until we reach a level of 3 feet. And that starts impacting San Francisco on the eastern side. At 5 feet, you start seeing significant impact in other parts of the city, and the eastern side is even more impacted. It became clear to me that the areas of San Francisco around the Dogpatch neighborhood are going to be the hardest hit by sea level rise. And it felt appropriate to focus on that since it's also where the Museum of Craft and Design is located. Now I'm going to zoom in on the Dogpatch area and repeat the sea level rise sequence so you can get a more intimate sense of what happens. I've highlighted where the museum is located in magenta. Although the museum is spared from sea level rise, much of the surrounding neighborhood is not. So for the final installation, I chose to make a series of 3 artworks, one showing the present day sea level and the other 2 showing 3 and 6 feet of sea level rise. I chose these amounts based on the scientific projections released in 2018 by the California Ocean Protection Council, a state-appointed science and policy advisory team. Projections for 2050 show a modest increase of 1 foot. However, by 2100, the likely projections are between 3 and 6 feet. And these are the 2 alternatives I chose to convey in my artwork. If carbon emission levels fall significantly, we'll only have 3 feet of sea level rise. But if they continue at current levels, we'll have 6 feet. I'll share some of my process that I used to make this series of 3 artworks. Because the cityscapes were identical in all 3 artworks, I decided to make one silk painting for the base cityscape and then try a technique that was new to me by scanning the original painting, modifying it in Photoshop, and then printing the artworks digitally on silk before stitching them. So here I'm showing some of the steps in creating the base silk painting, where I build up layers of resist and dye, working from light to dark. And these are a series of photographs I took over a period of 2 weeks of my progress on the silk painting. And you can see here how I build up the layers of dye and resist. When I finished the silk painting, I had it scanned with a high resolution scanner. And then I used Adobe Photoshop to modify that image to show 3 and 6 feet of sea level rise by adding a transparent blue layer on top to show where the flooding occurs. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do an actual Photoshop demo, but I'm going to walk you through some of the steps I went through to create the 6-foot version. Because sea level rise will also increase the depth of the bay, I wanted to make the bay water darker for 3 feet and then even darker for 6 feet. So I started with the original scanned image, and using Photoshop, I darkened the water. And then I overlaid the NOAA screenshot layer for 6 feet of sea level rise to create a mask in Photoshop for the flooded areas on top of the built environment. So to show you how the flooded areas from the NOAA image look on top of the city environment, I'll make the NOAA image somewhat transparent. Once I've created a mask from that, I put it all together into this finished image. So then I created these 3 digital files in preparation for printing on silk on a large format digital printer. And here's one of the photoshopped images being printed on paper-backed pre-treated silk. The pre-treatment bonds the printer inks to the silk, and the paper backing makes it possible to run the silk through the printer. I'll share just one video of stitching the artwork. I have a whole bunch. This is a time lapse of how I stitched the parallel lines in the pavement areas of the cityscape using the free motion embroidery foot and guiding the fabric under the needle. And here's the final stitched artwork showing 0, 3, and 6 feet of sea level rise. The final series of artwork I'm going to show to you came out of an art and science residency sponsored by the Palo Alto Art Center and Junior Museum and Zoo called Creative Ecology. I was one of 4 artists awarded the residency, and each artist was asked to choose a local open space to work in. I chose Cooley Landing in East Palo Alto, an underserved community where 13.5% of the residents live below poverty level. As an artist, I'm interested in how landscapes change over time and the environmental implication of those changes. This is a bird's eye view of Cooley Landing today, but this peninsula of land didn't always exist. 200 years ago, the area was pristine wetlands, as shown in this historical map. I pointed out where Cooley Land would be if it existed back then. It was a favorite hunting and fishing spot for the indigenous people. There were so many birds that the sky would be black with them, and hunters could actually catch them by using nets. Big changes began during the gold rush when it became a shipping port. A shipping dock was built and it became known as Cooley Landing. The biggest changes happened, however, from 1932 to 1960, when it was the San Mateo County dump. You can see in the photographic timeline along the bottom how landfill created the peninsula we know today as Cooley Landing. Unfortunately, this filled in valuable wetlands and contaminated the soil with lead, mercury, PCBs, and other toxins. After 150 years of industrial use, Cooley Landing is being transformed into a new open space park. The toxic landfill has been capped with 6 feet of clean soil, and native wildlife is returning to the area. During the first part of the residency, the public was invited to do art and science activities at Cooley Landing with me and 2 art and science teachers. We examined the environment up close with magnifying glasses and then sketched what we observed. And we examined mud and water samples under the microscope. And I was impressed with how much life we found. So this is the artwork I made in response to these discoveries. It's called Cooley Landing, Life and Water, and it's in the Making Waves exhibition. You can see the Cooley Landing Peninsula along the top of the painting. I found it really heartening that even though there had once been a toxic landfill at this site, there was so much life in the water. So the circle in the lower right is the view through the microscope to what lives in the water and mud surrounding Cooley Landing. I want to share another artwork from this residency that's difficult to show in an exhibition like Making Waves because it was a community engaged land art installation. It began as a temporary artwork and has turned into a living public art installation. For this project, I went way outside of my comfort zone. I usually create my artwork in solitude, but this time I invited the public to work with me on creating an art installation to mark the former shoreline of Cooley Landing. Since Cooley Landing was a landfill site on the bay, it's part of that same story of filling wetlands around the bay that I explored in the series of stitched paintings about wetlands in San Francisco Bay. And somewhere on that artificial peninsula of land is the old shoreline of the bay. So I needed to locate exactly where that shoreline was. And I returned to that beautiful United States Coastal Survey map from 1857. And I pointed out where Cooley Landing is on that map, and you can see the extensive wetlands that were there, as well as the former shipping pier. By placing this map over a recent Google Earth satellite image, I could locate the former shoreline relative to the present day features. And then I marked the proposed placement for the installation on the map in blue, avoiding areas that are off limits to the public. So here I've zoomed in closer to show you more details. I didn't have a good way to geolocate the shoreline using technology in the field. So this was the map that guided me in placing the installation in the actual landscape. I went really old school and used features in the landscape such as the picnic area, trees, the stripes in the parking lot, and walkways. Everyone was invited to participate in helping to create this installation, and people of all ages from East Palo Alto and surrounding communities participated. This little guy was 3 years old at the time, and the oldest participant was 80 years old. On the day of the installation, I marked the former shoreline with landscape stakes and orange flagging tape. And then people from the community helped hammer in blue survey whiskers along this line using 5-inch nails. There were both families and individuals. And this was a city council member from East Palo Alto who showed up in a suit and tie. The entire installation was built during 6 different days in July of 2015. And here's a view of part of the final temporary installation. It's over 400 feet long and it's made of 2,000 plastic survey whiskers. So some of you might be wondering why I use plastic, such an environmentally questionable material. Well, I chose the survey whiskers for several reasons. First of all, they're durable. And then especially, they don't present a tripping hazard. Since this is a park where people can walk anywhere, that was really important. The bright blue color suggests water, and they're really easy to remove, install and remove. And I plan to reuse them for other projects. So people loved this installation and they really wanted it to stay. But as an environmentalist, I couldn't leave the plastic out there. It was fine for a temporary installation, but not a permanent one. So I needed to find a new material that I could replace the plastic with. And I thought it would be really cool to use a native plant. So I consulted with a local restoration nonprofit named Grassroots Ecology, and they came up with the perfect suggestion. They suggested a California native plant called Juncus, and it's perfect on many levels. It looks like the survey whiskers. It's tall and it's this dark bluish green in color, and it stays green year round. So it'll stand out against the meadow grasses that are yellow green in the spring and then brown the rest of the year. And it's a native plant, so it's well suited to the climate at Cooley Landing. It's drought tolerant. And with that idea, the Living Shoreline Project was born. I partnered with that local restoration nonprofit, Grassroots Ecology, and they received grant funding to replace the plastic survey whiskers with native Juncus. During the spring and fall of 2017, we worked with community volunteers to plant Juncus along the line of blue survey whiskers. We also worked with groups of school children, like these adorable kindergartners, who, to my great surprise, were extremely careful with the plants, and they were very focused. And we worked with the San Mateo County Department of Education to involve high school students from 6 different local high schools. We taught them about habitat restoration, climate change, and sea level rise, as well as art. And here's a photo of the baby juncus we planted, each one marked by a blue flag. We temporarily left some of the survey whiskers in place until the juncus grew taller. And this is the following year where the juncus grew to about a foot tall. And this is from a year ago. It's now about 2 feet high, and it can grow to 4 feet under good conditions. So we've named this installation the Living Shoreline Project because we're marking the former shoreline of the bay with living native plants. And I like to think of it as a living map. And I hope this installation inspires people to wonder, what would Cooley Landing be like today if the wetlands were still here? And what new things do we observe now that the filled land is here instead? And one more fun thing, the other day I was looking at Cooley Landing using Google Earth, and I realized that you can now actually see this land art installation from space. I've marked where it is on that. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and you can see more of my work in the exhibitions listed here and on my website. You can also follow me on social media where I post photographs and video about what I'm up to. So thank you so much for being here today, and I'll be happy to take your questions. I don't know about answers, but always happy to hear your questions.
Thank you, Linda. Fantastic. Before we start into the Q&A, and feel free everyone to type those in the next few moments. I just wanted to mention again that Linda's talk is recorded and it'll be archived on craftinamerica.org and our YouTube channel as well for anyone who wants to revisit or share with anyone else. I want to thank our funders, particularly the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs and the California Arts Council. And thank you again, Linda. Amazing. I guess just starting off with the Living Shoreline Project, I'm wondering, it's such an interesting project. I wonder if you are going to continue that possibly elsewhere. It just seems like a great way to involve public, and amazing that you had politicians involved, a great crossover.
Yeah, it was really, really a wonderful project, and I definitely want to do more of that. Finding locations where that kind of work can happen is complicated. And I was actually amazed that I could do a public art installation on in a park. And so it was a really unique situation. But I'm in talks for longer term projects that are in process, and hopefully some of them will come through in the future.
Great. Any work, you're very focused obviously on Northern California in terms of landscape, and I wonder if Southern California, being a native, if you've done any depictions or any projects about landscape down here.
I haven't done any in Southern California yet, but I do have one that's coming up. I have a commission from UC Irvine to do a piece about the Santa Ana River watershed. So that'll be happening this year and opening next year.
Fantastic. Let's see. There are a couple questions in terms of your technique, and I'd love to know in part how you came to this technique and process. You know, if this was something that had interested you earlier in your life, and you know, why fiber and why this particular process, but questions about the distinctions that you make between this and quilting, because it's so interrelated.
Yes. So I'll take that last one first. So I call my work stitch paintings. I use quilting techniques to make it, and my work is technically an art quilt. But I found that when I would tell people what my work was, without being in front of my work, people had this different image of what it was. They would think that it was really big, like bed sized, and that it was pieced fabric. And I found myself constantly backpedaling from having said that it was a quilt. So I adopted this terminology of stitch paintings. But my work is very much indebted to quilting tradition. And so that's the reason for the distinction. And how I came to doing this work was when I left. So I worked in software for 10 years. My degrees are in, I've made art all of my life, and wanted to study art in college, but I blessed to have parents who saved money for my college education, and that gave them a say-so in what I studied. And they insisted that I get a degree that I could earn a living with at graduation time. And so I happened to be good at math and ended up getting a bachelor's in math and then a master's in computer science, and then worked in the software industry for 10 years. And after that experience, which was really incredible, I decided it was really time to get back to what I always really wanted to do, which is making art. And so I was doing watercolor landscape paintings. I've always loved textiles. I was taught to sew and embroider when I was really young by my maternal grandmother. And so I've always sewn my own clothes all my life. And one day I went to a silk painting demonstration at an art store where I could actually like pick up a brush and dip it into the dye and touch it to the silk. And I was just mesmerized. I was hooked. And so I realized that there was a lot of connection between watercolor and silk painting. And I started making silk paintings. And I thought I would make wearable art from it, combining my interest in sewing clothing. And then I realized that although I loved doing the silk painting, I hated doing the repetitive sewing of the clothing, and I did not want to farm it out. I had just left a job where I was managing 30 people, and I didn't want to manage anyone ever again. Even though my employees were fantastic, I did not enjoy being in management. And so I started, you know, just making wall art from the silk paintings, and looking at the linear nature of it, it just begged to be quilted and be more textural. And so I took a one-day quilting class to learn some basic techniques and then figured out the rest on my own. So that's how I came to making that kind of work.
Your work is very Californian in that it seems like you're tapping a lot of California fiber art traditions, which is very interesting. I wonder if in particular there were precedents, artists that might have interested you as you began working with fiber, or if, you know, even at this point, if there's artists currently.
You know, I started learning about the California fiber artists around the same time that I started doing my work. I taught myself to silk paint from the books that were published and authored by Susan Moyer. And I greatly admire the California fiber artists, and some of them are my good friends now. I really admire the work of Judith Content, and there's many other fiber artists as well.
Mhm. In terms of your use of digital printing, and that just seems like such a perfect synthesis of your background. Are you going to be doing more of that? Do you see, you know, new ways that you can adapt that with your work?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to be doing more of that, especially to be able to take my work larger. There's a limit to how large I can make a silk painting, and stretch it based on what I have. So I'm looking forward to exploring it more.
Great. Technical question from the audience. Do you steam the silk when you finish before adding batting? And there was also a question about what type of batting you're using and kind of
Okay.
the details of
Yes.
your tools.
So after I'm done painting those layers, building up the layers of resist and dye, I steam set the dyes, and I have a special steamer, an upright steamer where I roll up the fabric around a hardware cloth tube and steam it. And what the steaming does is it creates pressure so that the silk dyes can bond with the protein fiber. And then when it's done steaming, I wash out any residual dye and also the water soluble resist that I use. And then the batting that I use different kinds of batting, but more recently I've been using a recycled polyester batting. I've tried wool batting, but I'm a little concerned. It hasn't worked out that well for me. So I use primarily polyester.
I guess that leads into, wanted to mention that we're working on a project to create an artist, community generated project for Artist Studio Sustainable Tips, the Artist Studio Green Guide. And so we invite all of you attending to share information and input into this. It'll be an online tool eventually. But you are you're well versed in so much policy and obviously attached to using your work to make these statements. I wonder if you have thoughts about how other artists can use their work to make an impact in climate change, and if there's anything that you want to share about what you are doing. Obviously there's it's difficult to make art and achieve what you want, and I think you're pointing out that polyester versus wool, there's choices that always have to be made, but how you kind of navigate that and to make your practices eco-friendly and sustainable as possible.
Yeah, so as far as in my own art practice, what I do to address environmental concerns is when I started silk painting, I started by using the French silk dyes. And you open up a bottle of that and the fumes come out and they're overpowering. And I thought, wow, I wonder if this is unhealthy. And so I wrote away for the manufacturer's data sheets for them. And you can do that for any product that you use. And I got the data sheet back, and it basically said nothing because of international patent conventions. They don't have to release what is contained in the dyes. And under safety, it said okay to drink. And I thought, this is so wrong. This is no. So I switched to American manufactured dyes made by Jacquard, and they're made non-toxic according to OSHA standards. So both for my own health and because I end up discharging some of the dye into our wastewater, this is a much better way to go. I also originally started out using a resist that was solvent based and had to be dry cleaned out of the artwork. Again, because that's the traditional silk painting materials. And then I learned about water soluble resists. And so I switched to those. They are not as easy to use as the solvent based resists, and they don't give you as fine a line, but I have found a way to work with them. So I've really adapted my technique to walk my talk. And, the polyester batting always gave me fits, but I was really happy to find companies that are now starting to manufacture recycled polyester batting. My work, I want that sculptural quality. So I need a really high loft batting, and I can't get that with the wool. Even when I build up multiple layers of it, it then gets really dense. But the polyester has this very fluffy quality to it. So,
Excellent. Yeah. Let's see a comment. If you are familiar with Maya Lin's installation at the David Brower Center, Berkeley, if you've ever met, I think finding parallels between your work and hers.
I'm not sure which Maya Lin installation is there. I've been to the Brower Center, but I haven't been there in a while. So, but I am familiar with the work of Maya Lin and really admire her work.
Great. Is your silk stretcher handmade?
Is what?
Your silk stretcher handmade?
Oh, yes. My silk stretcher is handmade, and it's inspired by the silk stretchers that Susan Moyer sells. And I customized to the sizes that I worked with. So
great. Let's see. Let's see. Steaming. Great. Yes, and wondering, in terms of your work, other successes that you've had in terms of crossing over into the environmental science world and into, for instance, with your land art installation, politicians kind of bridging that gap and using the art in that direction. Any other big successes like that you found particularly inspiring and positive?
well, I have been invited to be a keynote speaker at the San Francisco Bay Delta Science Conference, which is a very large conference that happens every 2 years involving policymakers, scientists, politicians, you name it. And so there's definitely a receptivity from that community of my work. And more recently, it's become popular when people who work at different agencies, environmental agencies, retire or leave and move on to another job, that their coworkers have been purchasing my artwork as a going away present for their colleagues, which has been really, really gratifying. And I'm trying to think of some other circumstances where
always exciting to hear when art makes that impact, crosses over, opens up the communication.
Yeah, I think the scientists really appreciate the fact that, one of the challenges that they have is in communicating their results to the public in a way that touches them emotionally. Like the hard data doesn't always do that. So I think they really appreciate having art convey their messages.
Right, absolutely. And beyond that, I think the takeaway we should all have from the talk is that we should all go see our garbage dumps, and that might change a lot of our perspectives. There's another excellent bonus. Somebody's asking about the pencil you use for the design transfer specifically.
Yeah, it's a Clover silver marking pencil.
And using other recycled silk from fashion industry, dead stock, anything like that you've considered?
No, I haven't been able to find any sources for that. So I purchased my silk since I just use plain white silk and I don't want it to be treated with anything. So.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Linda. This was fantastic.
Thank you. It was really an honor to be able to join you today.
A real pleasure. And thank you to everybody for joining us. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye.